What's your true life story that nobody will believe? Story 1. My dad was married twice before he met my mom. When he was with his second wife, he would travel a lot for work, which I knew. What I didn't know was that one night he came home and found his wife in bed with another man. He actually walked in on them. He left the room and came back with a gun. He shot the man dead and wounded his wife. He turned himself in immediately and was sent to prison. He was sentenced to 10 years in a maximum security prison. In the last year he was in prison, which was the 4th year, he got out early for good behavior, and because the judge ruled it a crime of passion, he met the prison minister. That prison minister was my mom. My dad was a convicted killer, and my mom was the minister. I am the product of a conjugal visit. Story 2. Just after I turned 19, I was arrested and charged with an armed robbery I was completely innocent of. I spent 10 months in jail, 6 of which were in solitary confinement on Suis watch. I had spent my birthday at a resort hotel with my girlfriend at the time. That night, around 3 a.m., the front desk was robbed by 2 people, one with a gun, the other with a knife. We were questioned when we left the hotel at 11 a.m. since we roughly matched the height-weight description of the masked robbers. Later that day, it was discovered that my girlfriend had used a bad credit card to pay for the room, without my knowledge, and we were both publicly arrested on a sidewalk and taken to the state police barracks in handcuffs, without a word about what we were being charged with. We were taken to separate rooms and questioned for hours on end about the robbery. The same questions, over and over again. She ended up going to jail for the credit card fraud, and I was released but told to return the next day for further questioning. I did, and was taken to a back room, sat in a corner, and interrogated by 2 detectives who relentlessly picked apart everything I said, looking for any circumstantial evidence to connect me to the crime. They suggested that my girlfriend had committed the robbery and that I was going down with her if I didn't give them information. Being 19, I had no idea what to do and believed them. I didn't question the false information they gave me, and I was brought several times to the brink of giving a confession after being threatened with 10 years upstate if I didn't cooperate. 10 days later, 2 officers showed up at my door and arrested me for armed robbery. My girlfriend had been coerced into giving a confession implicating me as an accomplice. I was placed immediately into solitary on 24-hour Suis watch and anxiously waited for a public defender. A week later, she finally showed up. I told her I was totally innocent. She rolled her eyes and said, "Are you kidding me?" I burst into tears. My last hope of release was crushed, and she realized I was telling the truth. She said there was no defense against my girlfriend's confession, and I sank into such a deep depression, coupled with shock, that I had a psychotic break a few months into my stay. 90 days in solitary at 19, with no hope of proving your innocence. We'll do that. The district attorney made periodic visits, offering 2 to 5 year deals for a confession and 10 years if I fought the charges. I told him I wouldn't admit to something I didn't do. Fast forward to 6 months after my arrest, all spent in solitary. I was woken up and driven early one morning to the state police barracks, where the DA met with me in a back room and said, "We have determined through further investigation that you were not at the scene of the crime." I was bursting with anger and said, "So you'll be releasing me today and dropping all charges, correct?" He looked nervous and said, "No, we can't let you go without charges. It would look very bad on us. But I'll tell you what, we'll drop all the charges and give you a charge of interfering with the investigation. You'll be out in less than 6 months." I told him to get my lawyer. I had a fairly heated exchange, my first real emotions other than despair in half a year, and eventually agreed. I pled guilty to aiding and abetting the consummation of a crime after the fact and ended up serving 10 months total. A few months after my release, my girlfriend was also released, and we tried piecing together what had happened. Out of nowhere, the mother of the man who planned and committed the robbery found us and told us in person that her son had admitted to her that he robbed the place with a close friend. He had been fired from the resort 3 days earlier and needed money to support his addiction. He knew which day would bring the most profit, where the money was, how to get it easily, and how to bypass all the security. She went to the police, but they turned her away, saying they already had the people who did it and didn't want to hear more. We tried hard to find a lawyer to take our case, but were never successful. That DA was later investigated for intimidation and abuse of power in a separate case, And to this day, that's my only sense of justice in the situation. Story 3. I was declared a divine gift by the monks of St. Catherine's Monastery in Egypt. The monastery was built around the alleged burning bush from the book of Exodus, and since I was really into religions at the time, I asked the monks some questions about the bush and whether they had any other interesting relics in the monastery. The monks went silent and asked me and my family to follow them down to the gates of the burning bush. They let us see the alleged remnants of the burning bush, even though we were not Orthodox Christians. This is a privilege granted only to high-ranking officials in the Orthodox Church, and they said we were the first secular people to ever see the bush. After visiting the bush, the monks gave me a special blessing and declared me that divine gift, along with a silver ring with Greek writing on it. I was a kid at the time, so I didn't really react to it in an extravagant way, but my mom was stunned for days, as she is a very religious person. Now, at an older age, I wonder if they do this every now and then, as a kind of joke, or if they actually saw something special in me. Edit. For the people asking, I still have the ring at my childhood home, but I'm sorry I can't provide pictures because I live pretty far away. I'm not a religious person. My agnosticism grows stronger every year. And no, even though I have what some would call an eidetic memory, it doesn't mean I can remember what happened on a specific date many years ago. It means I can memorize pictures, texts, and number chains for a long time after seeing them once. I'm still bad at math, though. Story 4. I was in Mexico way past my visa allowance. I was only allowed 90 days, but I had been there for about 6 months at the time of this story. I was driving and passed a police car while going too fast, so I got pulled over. I should mention I was also working illegally in Mexico at the time and had my uniform and supplies in my trunk. As I'm pulled over and doing the whole license and registration thing, the cops asked me for my visa. I told them it was at my house, which wasn't too far away, and asked if they would allow me to go get it. At this point, I just wanted to be alone for a second so I could make some calls and figure out what to do. They asked me if they'd let me get it. Would it even be valid? Not wanting to lie and risk making things worse, I told them no, it was expired, and asked them what would happen now. They started explaining that they would have to take me to jail and then I'd be deported. At this point, I was talking to one officer while the other was searching my car and found my uniform. They asked me if I was working in Mexico. Now they were getting angry and started making vague threats about how I'd receive the same treatment Mexicans get when caught working illegally in the US. At that moment, I realized they hadn't noticed that my license was Canadian. I told them, and the situation instantly changed. Suddenly, they didn't care about the visa and started asking me tons of questions about Canada. Is it cold all year? Do bears wander the streets of Toronto? We talked for quite a while, and they seemed really interested in Canada and were super friendly once they realized I wasn't American. So after I calmed down a bit, I figured I might as well ask again what they wanted to do about the visa situation. They seemed apologetic and said, unfortunately, they had already called it in, so they had to bring me to the station. As I was getting ready to go with them, they heard a call on the radio in their cruiser. One of them ran to answer it, then came rushing back to my car and told me to quickly get in and follow them down the road and not even think about trying to get away. At this point, I had no idea what was happening, but I did what he said and followed them as they sped off, over 100 in a 60. About 2 minutes down the road, a car bomb had gone off near a restaurant and injured, maybe even killed, I never found out, a bunch of people. We pulled up to the smoldering car, and the cops got out and told me to wait in my vehicle. As I sat there, they went off to handle the scene. After about 20 minutes, one of the officers came back to my car, handed me my license, told me to go home, not to get caught again, and to get back to Canada as soon as possible. I ended up staying in Mexico another 8 months before finally going back. Story 5. My cousin and I, both males, were about 12 years old. And like most 12-year-old boys, we like climbing things. We decided to climb onto the roof of a house, and everything went smoothly. We got up there, hung out, and talked about how awesome we were for conquering this mountain of a house. When it was time to get down, we had to drop down and hang from the edge to reach our feet onto a railing on the back porch. My cousin went first and got down with no problem, exactly as planned. So I was feeling more confident than ever. I scooted to the edge of the house, grabbed the roof, and dropped down to hang. But my grip wasn't what I thought it was. I lost my hold and, just like in the movies, landed with one leg on each side of the rail. I rolled off to my right so I would land on the deck and could cry in the fetal position, but I didn't realize the grill was right there. I hit my head on it on the way down. I had to go to the hospital because my groin was black and blue, and a kind young nurse had to scan the area to make sure there was no serious damage. Luckily, there were no lasting effects, and now I can look back and laugh about it. Story 6. I was enjoying a nice spring day and decided to go for a run. After 5 to 6 miles, I was getting close to home and slowed down to cool off. As I turned onto my street, I heard a noise behind me and saw a baby fawn following me. As soon as I stopped and turned around, the fawn looked around and started wobbling away from me. And I mean wobbling. This thing was so young it was barely walking steadily. I turned back around and started running home again, and the fawn followed me down the road. I stopped. Same thing. It looked around and stumbled away. This repeated 3 to 4 more times before I realized that I had taken off my white shirt and tucked it into the back of my shorts when I was running. The fawn must have seen the bouncing flash of white and instinctively followed it, but got confused when we stopped and there were no other deer around. So I turned around and led him back down the road to where I first saw him. I spotted a doe standing back in the trees, so I pulled out my shirt and gently shooed the fawn back into the woods. Story 7. I've had numerous wild creatures approach me at random times with absolutely zero fear. In college, I was walking through the woods that stretched between my dorm and the football field, where I parked my car. There was a clearing that overlooked the field, and the track team was practicing. My roommate was a vaulter, so I stopped to watch for a bit and leaned against a tree. I had an apple in my bag, and eventually I felt a nudge. A fawn had come up and was nosing around in my purse. I stood completely still and let it sniff me. I noticed the mother deer was a few feet away. Very slowly, I reached into my bag, and the baby bounded away. I set the apple down on the ground and walked away slowly. Later that afternoon, I walked through the woods again, and the apple was still there, but now it had bites taken out of it. I've also been hiking and had squirrels and bunnies come up to me with no problem. Birds will land near me and not fly away. It's pretty awesome, but since it only happens when I'm alone, I don't really tell anyone. It feels like my own little secret, like maybe I'm actually Snow White. Story 8. I met a guy online, fell in love. We were a couple for 5 or so months and began to make plans to meet. Before that could happen, his sister was reportedly killed in a car accident. Meeting plans were put on hold. He started to pull away. I went to Baton Rouge with the Red Cross after Hurricane Katrina. While there, I found out I was being catfished. I then had a brief encounter with another guy I knew from online for a couple of days. He turned out to be a top-notch jerk. I went home and called my catfisher. There was no car accident, his sister was alive, and it was basically a panicked attempt to delay meeting. I ended up eventually forgiving him. I flew across the country, met him, and fell in love in person. I moved out there a couple of months later. Everything was amazing. We were so happy for a year. Then he moved for his job, and despite his protests, I loved where we lived and had a great job. I followed him. 3 weeks later, he came to my apartment after work one day. He broke down in tears and told me he was getting married that weekend in an arranged marriage. 36 hours later, I watched him get on a plane and haven't seen him since. Tomorrow is his 7th wedding anniversary. Story 9. My biological father was a drug dealer, specifically coca. My mother was a client of his and started sleeping with him in exchange for drugs. She got pregnant and tried to have an abortion, but it failed. That's where I came into the picture. My father decided that he should harm me repeatedly from around ages 4 to 6. He then had the horrific idea to sell me to other men to be in a child exploitation and abuse ring. I was recorded being mistreated, and those videos were sold. I was never sent to kindergarten. Child Protective Services realized something was horribly wrong when I was 7, and I was sent to live with my grandparents. During the transfer from my mom to extended family, I was kidnapped. I was taken across the country and hidden in an attic for about a week before I was found. My uncle hired a private detective who was able to track me down and rescue me. There were multiple alerts sent out for me as well. My extended family did not even know I existed until CPS and the police contacted them. When I was finally found, they realized that at age 7, I weighed only 38 pounds and was severely malnourished. I had major developmental delays. I couldn't read, tie my shoes, or even use silverware. I had never seen a fork before. I was essentially a child that had never existed until then. There was a lengthy court battle, and I was sent to live with my grandparents, who I had never seen before. Things improved from there, and I lived with them until I was 15. Now I live with my uncle and his husband, and they legally adopted me at age 18. Today, I am a healthy, happy teenager who is a pre-med major and a vet tech. I wasn't supposed to make it, but I did. No one believes how crazy my life was because of how normal I seem now. Story 10. I used to live in Southwest Florida, and I loved to go fishing. I always went to this one pier that extended about 100 yards into the bay near my house. There were some people there fishing when I arrived. Through conversation while we watched our lines, I learned they had lost a fishing rod over the railing earlier. So, there I am casting for what I think was the third time. I reeled in a bit, and that's when I felt something tug. Thinking I just made the fastest catch ever, I reeled it in. And wow, it was tough. I thought my line was going to snap for sure. It didn't though. And when I pulled that missing fishing pole out of the water, I nearly lost it laughing. I got it up to the pier. The others were thanking me and laughing too, when I realized there was still tension on the line of the pole I had just fished out. Naturally, I started reeling again. This time it felt different. Something alive, no doubt. So I reeled, and I'm not kidding, I pulled a 2-foot wide stingray out of the water. Nobody believed me, even when I showed them the picture of the stingray on the pier, and honestly, it still frustrates me. Story 11. When I was 4, 1992, my mom, dad, sister, brother, and I were on our way back from South Dakota. We couldn't find a hotel the night before, so we slept in our Aerostar minivan. My parents didn't get much sleep because of this, and the next day my mom was driving on the interstate and began to fall asleep at the wheel. She crossed over the rumble strips to the left of the road, woke up, and overcorrected to the right. The minivan turned sideways and began to flip and roll at 65 miles per hour. Right before this happened, my siblings and I had gotten permission to switch seats so my dad could read to me from the passenger seat while I sat in the middle row behind him. We hadn't buckled up again yet. During the flipping and rolling, the back seat somehow flew out of the van, with my brother and sister going with it. I remember the moments leading up to the crash, but nothing during. Apparently, I somehow landed in my dad's lap in the front passenger seat, and he held me until the van came to a stop. The van stopped upside down on the road. Both my parents were still buckled in, and my dad was holding me while hanging upside down. He unbuckled himself, got out of the van, and left me with a woman who had stopped to help. He went back to get my mom, who was still buckled in. She is paraplegic, so she needed assistance getting out. He looked for my brother and sister while helping her, but they were nowhere in sight. After getting my mom out and helping her off the road, she looked around and didn't see my brother or sister. She began to panic and shout, "Where are they?" At that moment, my dad looked down the road and saw them walking toward us. They had landed on the side of the road. My brother had only a scrape on his nose and some bruises. He had landed in the grass. My sister was not as lucky. She landed on the road and got major abrasions on her arm and shoulder. She had gone through the glass and had a lot of it in her wounds. My mom, dad, and I escaped with minor scrapes and bruises. We were all rushed to the hospital and turned out okay. My sister got the worst of it, and I still remember her screaming as they pulled the glass out. She needed surgery on her arm due to torn tendons in her wrist. Overall, we were extremely lucky to survive. We speculate that if my brother and sister had been buckled in, it might have been worse, since they would have been strapped to the rear seat that flew out. I've told this story to friends and had to have my parents confirm it and my sister show them her scars just to get them to believe me. Story 12. Didn't happen to me, but to my grandmother. About 25 years ago, my grandma wanted to immigrate to America from Thailand. In order to speed up the process of getting a green card, she needed to marry an American. At the time, she was divorced and spoke very little English, but she had a friend connect her with an American man who was closeted and secretly had a boyfriend. She paid him an initial sum of money, and they got fake married. They went through the process, and eventually my grandma got a green card. It was at this time that she was supposed to pay him the rest of his fee, but a few days after she got her citizenship, her fake husband was tragically stabbed to death by someone. Immediately, the police contacted my grandma to inform her of her husband's death and told her she should probably call his family and inform them. My grandma then had to call this man's parents, who didn't even know she existed, and tell them their son had married a random Thai woman and that he had passed away. My grandma's been living in the US ever since, and she never ended up paying him the rest of the money. Story 13. My grandmother was murdered by my grandfather when my mom was a little girl. It was never officially proven, but we believe it happened. Backstory available if anyone is interested. Side note, the house she died in was also supposedly haunted. We have a couple of stories about that too. Edit. Sorry I took so long to reply, guys. I have a 16-month-old, so my computer time is quite limited. When my mother was 11, she lived at home with my nurse grandmother and abusive grandfather. My mom had a tough childhood and still wet the bed every night. She had 2 older siblings, but they were already moved out. Anyway, as mentioned, my grandmother was a nurse. She gave herself a vitamin shot every day, just administered it to herself, no big deal. She had been doing this for as long as my mother could remember. Well, on this particular night, there was a lot of fighting. Threats, crying, physical violence, the whole 9 yards. As my mother was going to bed, her father stopped her and offered her a glass of Coke. Of course, she said yes, not questioning why an adult would offer a known bedwetter a drink at bedtime. The next morning, my mother woke up to her 22-year-old sister shaking her and screaming for her to wake up. She said she felt dizzy and sick. She didn't understand why her sister was there or why she was screaming. Apparently, the night before, about an hour after my mother went to bed, my grandmother gave herself a fatal overdose of insulin. She only kept insulin in the house for emergencies related to my uncle. My aunt saw the body and said she had bruises and that the injection site had multiple punctures. This was back in the 1970s, and after my grandfather told the police that his wife was a heavy drinker and suicidal, they dropped the case. After my grandmother's death, my grandfather packed up and left without his 11-year-old daughter. My mom ended up growing up in group homes and had a very difficult youth. She later developed alcoholism as a way to reclaim a lost childhood, and that ultimately took her life 2 years ago on her 46th birthday. Nobody in my family has spoken to my grandfather since the 1970s. He may have approached my mother in the 1990s. She wasn't sure, but he left after making a rude comment about her biracial children. Even if he were around, he wouldn't be part of my life. Okay then, ghost story time. The first one happened right after my grandmother died, in the same house. My aunt moved in after my grandfather left to try to take care of my mother. It didn't work out, but that's beside the point. One day my mom got home from school and found my aunt sitting on the driveway, pale and shaking. My mom asked what was wrong, and my aunt said she refused to go inside. She had heard something strange in their mother's room. Out of habit, they didn't really go in there. My grandma had liked her privacy in life, except to occasionally clean. So my mother approached the door, thinking her sister was overreacting. As soon as she touched the doorknob, the entire door shook, as if someone had slammed into it. This was accompanied by a loud, deep roar. My mom immediately opened the door, thinking it was probably a dog or something. But nothing was there. Nothing was out of place. She said she was more curious than scared. Same house, same time frame. My mom was in her bedroom, doing something near the window. She happened to glance out and saw into her mother's window. Their windows faced each other across the backyard patio. She saw the heavy velvet drapes in her mother's room swinging violently back and forth, as if someone were pushing them. She ran into the room, but the curtains weren't even moving. This last part I haven't personally verified, but it's widely known in our family. After my mother moved out of the house and into a group home, the house was sold to a newlywed couple. A few months after they moved in, the husband allegedly lost his mind and committed a violent crime against his wife. He then tried to hide what happened. My family likes to use this as proof that something dark remained in that house. Story 14. I am not who I am. Back in the 1990s, I walked out of a hospital with another patient's identity and have been living as that person ever since. At the time, I already had no next of kin, and no, I do not know whatever happened to the person I took documents from. I have been living in a different country and have been issued passports in that person's name twice already. I submitted my biometric data, and since I had no problem obtaining the passports, I assume that my identity donor is most likely deceased. I am not a criminal, and I am a relatively successful expat businessman here with a permanent residence permit. I have never been back to my homeland since, and am currently working on obtaining citizenship here. Story 15. I work in a lumberyard that sells pretty much everything one needs to build a house. We also deliver using pickup trucks, dump trucks, and Teledyne forklift trucks. One day I was delivering a bunch of plywood and siding in a pickup to a new house being built in an already developed neighborhood. I got to the house, unstrapped everything, and started pulling siding off the truck and into the garage. I got 1 or 2 sheets off when I noticed some people congregating around the truck. I thought it was odd, but I figured I'd just keep unloading and get the job done. I got a few more sheets off, then noticed about 15 people standing around the truck. I stopped what I was doing and just stared. I wondered if I was about to get jumped. I pulled out my phone to call my boss and have him send someone out to help me or take me to the hospital if things got ugly. But then I noticed exactly who these people were. They were just neighbors, old folks, grandkids, parents, just people from around the neighborhood checking out what was going on. I shrugged it off as being a quiet neighborhood and went back to work. All of a sudden, I heard these folks chanting, "Lumberyard guy, lumberyard guy." They were cheering me on. In a daze, I unloaded the rest of the siding and plywood to much applause, got into the pickup, and drove back to the store. My boss thought I was making it up when I told him, as did all of my friends. It was surreal. Story 16. After my divorce, my ex moved 3 hours away with our sons. And over the next year, the boys would spend 2 weeks with me, 2 weeks with her, and so on. I was living in a beach town, so they spent virtually every afternoon they were with me in the water. My younger son was about 2.5 and was utterly fearless about charging directly into the waves. He was always so easily knocked over and pushed around, and my stress levels were high watching him. They were at their mom's one night, and it had been about 10 days since I'd seen them, when I had an absolutely terrifying nightmare about my younger son running into the waves and getting pulled out to sea. I was trying frantically to reach him, but people were holding me back, telling me, "He's gone. You will drown too." I shot up out of bed, practically hyperventilating. It felt so real. Moments later, my phone lit up with a text message, which was strange considering it was about 3 a.m. I looked at it, and it was the boy's mom saying, "Damnedest thing just happened. Your son just sat up in bed and threw up a bunch of water. He seems fine now." Story 17. I was camping. We had unpacked all of our stuff and had just finished setting everything up. We had put the bag of snacks, chips, granola bars, etc. on the picnic table. While we weren't paying attention, some raccoons jumped up on the table and stole the whole bag of our snacks. Oh well. Later that night, we were all drinking and chilling out by the campfire. You could say we were a bit drunk. It was also getting pretty dark. We heard rustling sounds coming from the picnic table behind us, where our cooler was. I grabbed my flashlight and started rushing over to the table to confront what I assumed was a raccoon. I didn't turn on the flashlight because I wanted to surprise it. So, I'm rushing the picnic table and I point the flashlight and turn it on. It was not a raccoon. It was a bear. Standing on his hind legs, he had opened our cooler and was digging through it. He looked at me, then went back into the cooler and grabbed our pack of hamburgers and started to run off. I did the most logical thing my slightly tipsy brain could think of. I chased after the bear yelling, "Give me back our hamburgers." I think I caught him off guard because he dropped the hamburgers and ran off into the forest. We ate those hamburgers the next day. They tasted like victory, so that's my story. No one believes me when I tell it, but my wife and 2 of my friends were there and saw everything. Story 18. When I was in 3rd grade, my appendix ruptured, putting me in the hospital for a long period of time. This was during the time when Beanie Babies were at their peak, and I was obsessed with collecting them. One day, as I was lying in the hospital bed watching television, I heard a knock at the door, and 3 nuns from the local Catholic diocese walked in. It was Valentine's Day, and they were visiting the sick children. They started talking to me, asking how I was feeling, etc. That's when I noticed one of the nuns had a basket full of Beanie Babies that they had been giving out to the children. I asked about them and was told they had the entire basket to give away, but there were very few kids in the ward. I asked if I could have them. The nuns agreed that I could have the Beanie Babies, but first I had to convert to Catholicism. I did it. Right as I got the Beanie Babies, my parents walked into the room and saw me, 3 nuns and a basket full of Beanie Babies praying for my soul. Story 19. I grew up in a difficult family situation. I had basically no interaction with my father, and my mother was married to my stepfather, who was an alcoholic. My mother was codependent and would get very unstable when drinking. Sometimes she would throw me out of the house. So when I was 12, it happened again. I ended up hanging around the train station, not knowing where to go or what to do. That's where this man approached me. I was 12, completely lost and upset, and I actually followed this man to his hotel room. He was probably around 30. And here's the amazing part. He just bought me dinner, didn't touch me at all, took me around the city the next day, and then disappeared from my life. I eventually went back home, because where else could I go? To this day, I can't believe how lucky I was. I realized it not long afterward. It made me believe that good things could still happen to me. It pushed me to work hard in school, because I knew the only way I'd ever have a place in this world was if I earned it myself, and education would help. It also made me appreciate people a lot more. Today I have a PhD, a good job, and live in a lovely place. I'm just missing a boyfriend and a cat. Story 20. My story is kind of long, and I've been told I'm making it up for attention multiple times because it's so unbelievable. So here it is. In year 6, grade 5 to 6 for you Americans, our school got a replacement principal who was extremely strict. She didn't believe in mental illness and would routinely single me out because I have selective mutism. Other girls in my class started bullying me too, and I began missing entire weeks of school just to avoid it. The principal locked me in dark closets even though she knew I was afraid of the dark, and decided that since I was skipping school, I needed to attend their morning club, which started at 5 a.m. I had to wake up at 5 a.m. and be taken there every day until I had behaved. It must have lasted at least 2 to 4 months. I started comfort eating and went from 90 pounds at 5 feet 2 inches to 180 pounds, which further fueled the bullying. She disliked lazy students, and I ended up failing my exams. Not that they matter much in primary school. I skipped the last day of school thinking I had finally escaped, but I hadn't. In secondary school, the principal had told them I was a troublemaker and requested that I not be placed with anyone from my old school. So I ended up in a class full of strangers and couldn't make any friends. My former friends abandoned me, which was the worst feeling in the world. Then the incident happened. I hated gym. Having suddenly gained weight, I was very uncomfortable in my new body, so I started skipping Tuesdays, gym day. One week, my mom had enough and wrote me a doctor's note saying I couldn't participate. She also convinced me not to bring my gym bag. Why carry an extra 2 kilograms? So I went to gym class, and another student with a broken arm handed in her note at the same time I did. There were 2 gym teachers. They looked at the other student and said, "You're okay," but then turned to me and started yelling, "Where is your gym kit? Where is it?" I instantly couldn't speak, thanks to selective mutism, which only made her more frustrated. Everyone in the changing room was staring at me, which becomes important later. She then pulled me out and yelled at me for another 10 minutes while I tried not to cry. Eventually, she forced me to put on old muddy gym clothes that didn't fit. She was also upset that the size 5 shoes wouldn't fit my feet. While I changed, I burst into tears and tried to call my mom. Not that she could do anything. But the teacher came back and interrupted the call. When we got to the gym hall, she made me run laps while everyone laughed. Then we had to pair up, so I went to my old best friend, and she completely ignored me. Like I wasn't even there. My feelings were so hurt, no one wanted to pair with me because I was crying. I never went back after that day. The teacher later lied and claimed I had a choice. She even paid the witnesses not to say anything. The school called social services because they were convinced my mom had harmed me and buried me in the backyard. It was unbelievable. After that, I was homeschooled for 4 years. In reality, I was left home alone every day, playing online games. I didn't leave the house once in those 4 years. So yes, people really did think I was gone. Last year, I went to college to get my secondary education. I get my results on August 21st. I've also lost 50 to 60 pounds of the weight I gained. Story 21. 10 years ago, I locked my keys and wallet in the car, with the engine running, about an hour away from home. It happened at a gas station in the middle of nowhere. I called my wife, but she couldn't come get me since we had a newborn and a 2-year-old at home. I didn't have anyone else to call. I was sitting on the ground next to my car when a man drove up and parked right beside me, which was really strange because I was parked near a phone booth, not near the pumps. I'm very shy and rarely talk to anyone, But the guy got out and just started chatting. He looked odd, so I told him I wasn't in a good mood. My keys were locked in my car, and unless he had a coat hanger, he should probably move along. He said he didn't have one, but he kept talking. At one point, he mentioned that I had a nice car, which was strange because I drove a 10-year-old Ford Escort. He said his wife had the same car, and then something clicked in his mind. He checked to see if he had her keys, and he did. He said, "Let me try your lock." Sometimes the keys work on the same model. He put the key in my lock, turned it, and the door opened. Just like that. I was stunned. I'm still not sure why he parked next to me since he wasn't getting gas. But once the door was open, he just drove off. Story 22. When I was 19, I traveled to China for a study abroad program, but I was told to leave because my visa had been revoked due to SARS. Not understanding much about visas or influenza at the time, I decided to stay, and it turned out to be amazing. For 8 weeks, I walked from village to village in the foothills of the Himalayas, near the edge of Tibet, in the border of Burma, in places so remote that many people had never seen foreigners before. I traveled with a few other college students who were just as young and naive as I was. I slept in chicken coops, schoolhouses, and abandoned sheds. I hitchhiked and even slaughtered a goat and a chicken to eat. We saw people who had never worn shoes and wore capes made from bark. I walked across a gorge at least 100 feet above a raging river on a bridge made of vines. I ate fish heads and rice. We went to a river valley that had only recently gotten a road built. We were supposed to hike out over a mountain pass, but the pass was blocked by snow, so we had to go back the way we came. The only road out was now impassable because the tunnel through the mountain had been exploded, literally destroyed. We hitchhiked to the tunnel entrance and convinced the construction crew to let us through. On the other side, the workers at the Chinese construction camp welcomed us and made us their guests. We played guitar and sang songs, though the only one we all knew was Baby Got Back. That night, I slept in a toolbox that had been converted into a bed. Story 23. I've been blessed by a Ukrainian woman who claimed to be a princess, supposedly placed into protective services in the 1980s and relocated to the middle of nowhere, Southern Oregon. While she may have simply been an eccentric older woman, she had an incredible amount of wealth, like on a different level, wealthy, and spoke perfect Ukrainian. I met her because my dad was driving a taxi, and she would always request rides to a hair salon, despite living 50 miles from the nearest one. She paid very generously for the trip every week. One day, my dad picked me up to give me a ride, got the call to pick her up, and brought me along. On the way, he told me the princess story and said it was all very hush-hush. When I met her, I took her hand and kissed it. I was 16 and thought it was the polite thing to do. Apparently, this made her incredibly happy. No one had done that for her in years. She grabbed my hands and began chanting and singing in Ukrainian. When she finished, she started crying, tears of joy, and said it was a traditional blessing given by royalty to visitors and people of the land. Whether or not she was actually a princess, it's still a very cool story. Nobody believes me because it sounds too far-fetched, and honestly, I'm not even sure myself. Story 24. One of the first few times I ever got drunk, I woke up in the middle of an empty field late at night and tried to sit up, only to find I couldn't. Something was attached to my head. I reached back and realized that all the hair on my head had been braided into the hair of another girl I barely knew. I had to gently wake her up, awkwardly explain the situation, and we unbraided our hair before heading home. I never found out who did it. Another time, I snuck into a massive concert in New York City featuring two of the biggest rock bands of the year. I hid behind an amp and ran in through the roadie entrance. I ended up watching the Black Keys and the Foo Fighters from the front row, standing next to several celebrities, and no one ever noticed I didn't have a VIP pass. One weekend, my parents left me and two friends alone, assuming the other's parents would be home. Turns out, both sets of parents made the same assumption. So we had two houses and no supervision. They left us $100 for groceries for the week. Instead, we bought two inflatable boats and attempted to paddle across an isolated bay using plastic shovels as oars. A lightning storm hit in the middle of the journey, and it got extremely dangerous. We were too far in to turn back, so we pressed on and somehow made it to our friend's dock. Meant for real boats, not inflatable ones. Later, we learned the storm was part of a massive hurricane farther down the coast. When I was a kid, I was oddly obsessed with reading books by Oliver Sacks, the neurologist. One day at the library, I asked the librarian if they had any of his books. She started saying no, and then pointed out that I was interrupting the man in front of me. He turned around and said, "I was only here to drop off this bag full of Oliver Sacks books," and handed them to me. It may not sound like much, but that was such a bizarre and perfectly timed coincidence. Story 25. 2 weeks after my 27th birthday, I almost died. I was at work when I felt what I thought was mild heartburn. Then the side of my jaw began to hurt, which was strange. I rubbed my jaw and swallowed, then suddenly felt a popping sensation near my heart, followed by intense burning pain with every heartbeat. I went into the bathroom to try and calm down, but it only got worse. I was writhing in pain. I called a friend to take me to the ER. They did a chest x-ray and said I hadn't had a heart attack. No further testing. The doctor told me he wasn't sure what was wrong and sent me home. I was too sick and out of it to question it. At home, I got worse, violently ill every 10 minutes. I wasn't sleeping or recovering, so after a couple of days, I went back to the ER. Turns out my oxygen level was down to 48%. That finally got the doctor's attention. I was so sick I had aspirated into my lungs, causing pneumonia. They performed a CT scan and discovered I had a leaking aortic aneurysm. That explained the initial pain and everything that followed. I was life-flighted to another hospital with more specialized care. They told my mom to call family. I might not make it. To make things worse, we flew through a major storm, and turbulence was so bad they couldn't confirm if I had a pulse, which terrified my mom. They let her come due to the severity and distance. The kind of heart issue I had is normally seen in men over 60, not in a healthy, active 27-year-old woman. Ironically, I had joked on my birthday that 27 felt old, like I needed to start being serious about life and goals. My friends teased me about that, but I definitely proved my point. Story 26. Okay, I grew up with extremely abusive parents. It was so bad that I'm honestly lucky I had both of them, because one usually stopped the other before something fatal happened. Anything more than pancakes for dinner was considered a luxury. I was diagnosed with epilepsy at age 10, and things went downhill fast. A few years later, I was drinking heavily and skipping school constantly. One day, I realized I wanted more from life than what I was living. At 16, I left home and moved 300 miles away, where I didn't know anyone. I stopped drinking and had no social life, so I couldn't party even if I wanted to. I worked for a year, then enrolled in and graduated high school. At 19, I moved across the country with a boyfriend. We broke up soon after. 3 years later, I married his coworker. That marriage didn't last long. We were best friends who thought we were something more. We're still close. We do lunch on Tuesdays, and he comes over on Wednesdays to play video games. After that, I went to college. Now I live with my boyfriend of 4 years. My family is still chaotic, so I keep my distance. Example, my mom and sisters have a restraining order against my dad, who had a breakdown 3 years ago. I don't need one, because I'm in another province. My mom hosts BBQs, but has to pick up my sister's kids herself, because my sister had an affair that broke up her roommate's marriage. I talk to my mom once a week, but it's hard. She always brings up my dad and plays the victim. It frustrates me. He hurt me badly and she did nothing. He never touched her, but she cries when he threatens her. Meanwhile, he had me on the floor, kicking my ribs. Today I have a great job, making more than I probably should by about $12,000. I have no children and plan to keep it that way. My boyfriend is incredible. He helped me realize how broken I really was. It took a long time to stop flinching when he reached for me. That's the impact of my childhood. That's basically my life so far. Story 27. It's not exactly over the top, but it's such a lovely and bittersweet story that it inspired me to write a screenplay based on it. One night last year, after a very messy breakup, my ex and I met up to talk things through. She was angry. I was emotional. We met at the beach, and after about 30 minutes, things started to calm between us. We ended up spending 14 hours together, walking, talking, watching the tide at 3 a.m., and sitting in a harbor master's office discussing life and everything we'd messed up. We even ducked out of bars to avoid friends seeing us together because it would have caused confusion. At some point, we decided to stay up and watch the sunrise. Throughout our relationship, we had made so many promises and kept so few. We figured we could at least fulfill one of them. We were exhausted. We nearly fell asleep in a supermarket while sitting on those chairs used for trying on shoes. But we made it through the night and watched the sunrise. Looking back, I think we were holding on to each other, knowing it was our last moment, but unable to fully let go. We didn't kiss or do anything romantic that night, but we held hands, and we connected in a deeper way than we ever had during the relationship. Walking away from her that morning, knowing it was the end, was one of the hardest things I've ever done. I wrote a screenplay about it called Chasing Promises, and I hope one day to turn it into a film. We don't talk anymore, and I don't know if we're on good terms, but I hold on to that night. Somewhere, I hope she does too. Or maybe I'm still chasing those promises, the part that always gets me. When we first met up that night, she said, "I can't stay long, so say what you have to say." Story 28. Well, the story begins with me going to the library after school to finish a project. Our library had a back room filled with 2 rows of computers, separated by a shelf of assorted books. It was 30 minutes after school let out, and most everybody had left the library except for me and this other student. He was using a computer on the other side of the shelf. There was a small space between the shelves, so I was able to see him working on the computer. After about 10 minutes, I noticed him squirming a lot. I was confused but didn't think much of it. Then I saw him stand up and do something inappropriate. He pulled a book off the shelf behind him and appeared to behave in a disturbing way with it. I was in shock. As he walked out, he finally noticed me and rushed out with his face red. I went and told my friends and even showed them the book he had used. When we opened it, the pages were stuck together like someone had poured glue in the middle of it. The story was so far-fetched that my friends didn't believe me and began joking that I had been the one who did it. Most of them have come to terms with the truth, but a few are still skeptical. Story 29. When I was 24 or so, I was drinking at a small local bar. The owner was working that night. He was a pretty stout guy, and he caught an underage drinker in his bar. He physically removed the kid from the premises and knocked him down a few times. The kid was drunk and being argumentative. He looked about 18 or 19. After getting tossed out, he stayed near the entrance with a friend and smoked a cigarette. He was loudly talking about how he wanted revenge. I stayed behind to see what would happen. The kid eventually ran off to his truck with a determined look. He came back holding something, and his friend was frantically trying to stop him. The kid had a pistol. This was a small bar, so there wasn't a security guard or bouncer. Drunk me stood between the kid and the entrance and began talking to him. I handed him one of my cigarettes and kept calm, trying to talk him down. Slowly, after what felt like forever, I convinced him to give me the weapon. I nodded at his friend, who restrained him while I re-entered the bar, locked the main door and the side entrance, and alerted the owner. I told everyone to stay inside in case the kid had more weapons, and then called the police. They came, but the kid had already left. So yeah, somehow I managed to de-escalate what could have been a tragedy. People at the bar would believe it, but most people I know today wouldn't believe the story if I told them. Story 30. For some reason, I decided to take the bus to an Asian market on the other side of town to get a birthday gift for a Thai coworker. I can't remember exactly what I was looking for. It was the weekend, I slept in, and I almost decided not to go. I didn't even need to get this coworker anything, so why bother? Next thing I know, I feel an urge to get dressed immediately and catch the next bus. A voice in my head, my own internal voice, not anything delusional, said, "You will meet a man on the bus." What? I even laughed and said out loud, "I do not want to meet a man on the bus." I wasn't that desperate. So I hurry up, catch the bus, and at one of the stops, a guy gets on who I was really good friends with in college. We had lost touch in the 90s and hadn't seen each other in 12 years. I stared at him the entire bus ride, barely believing it was him. He had been one of the best friends I ever had, and I always wondered what happened to him. We got off at the transit center, and I said hello. It was a nice reunion. He looked well put together and mentioned he was looking for a place to live. I told him my fiancée and I had broken up, and my couch was available if he needed a place short-term. He had let me stay with him years ago when I left an abusive marriage, so I felt I owed him. A week later, he called and asked to meet at a bar. I showed up and he was already drunk. He admitted he had just run away from rehab and needed a place to stay. I had no idea what I was getting into. Turns out, he had become a chronic alcoholic and had been homeless for years. I let him stay with me off and on for 2 years between rehab stints. I'm not a spiritual person, so I don't know what to make of the voice telling me I'd meet a man on the bus, as if it was something I couldn't miss. But those 2 years were awful. If I hadn't taken that bus, I would have been spared it. I gained nothing but bitterness and a loss of empathy for people in that situation. He didn't gain much either. Why did I get led into that? Why not a decent guy or winning lottery numbers? Story 31. The story of how I broke my knees in third grade summer plays out like a children's movie. I lived on a tiny one-way street, and just up the road from my house was a huge oak tree with a branch that spanned the entire street. There was a little boy, we'll call him Tommy, because that's what we called him then. He was your classic playground antagonist. He constantly said, "You can't do that, you're a girl," to me, the biggest tomboy on the block. One day he goaded me into climbing the tree. I climbed the huge oak tree. Tommy followed me up. I reached the branch that crossed the street. Tommy climbed right behind and pushed his way in to sit too. I ended up in the middle of the branch over the street and started to panic because the branch wobbled. Tommy did the classic jerk move of rocking it back and forth to scare me. Then he started bouncing in place. I fell out of the tree and landed on the hood of a car. The poor guy driving, doing 15 miles per hour, definitely didn't expect a 9-year-old to fall knees first in front of his windshield. I went to the hospital. Tommy's parents paid part of the bills. I ended up with 2 full leg casts and a wheelchair for the summer and the first semester of school. But I had a blast. I was the battering ram in several epic games, and weirdly enough, I earned Tommy's respect. We actually became friends after that. Story 32. It all started in high school when I was dating this girl. We met my sophomore year, and it was one of those relationships where we became each other's whole world. We both had pretty traumatic childhoods that followed us into our teen years, so it was comforting to have someone who understood. To keep it simple, we were too close. Even at that young age, things got intense. We were on and off constantly. She would say she was pregnant to stop me from leaving, and we verbally hurt each other almost every day. Eventually, I ended things because she had cheated, and I didn't want to deal with the chaos anymore. That's when it got crazy. At first, it was difficult for both of us, but I moved on and met someone new, and that sent her over the edge. I'd walk outside and see her car pulling away from my street. I recognized her license plate. She keyed my car. She made threats, including false accusations. She did petty things like throw eggs at my car and started harassing the girl I was seeing. This went on for a month or two, but I figured if I ignored it, it would stop. Then the evening before my 19th birthday, I left my girlfriend's place like any normal night. The next morning, I woke up for work and checked my phone. Overnight, my girlfriend's house had caught fire. Her entire family barely escaped in time, but thankfully everyone was okay. At first, it seemed like an electrical issue or a fluke, but the fire department determined it started in the garage and was intentional. Arson. The investigator told us it was very rare and asked if anyone might have a grudge. My ex was the only person that came to mind. It was beyond awkward dealing with my girlfriend's family after that, but I tried to brush it off. I knew my ex was unwell, but this seemed too extreme. Later, I found out through mutual friends that she had gotten my girlfriend's address from her 16th birthday invitation years prior. To this day, I don't know if she did it herself or had someone else do it, but she spoke about the fire with an unsettling level of smugness. All fingers pointed to her, but by the time I found out, the investigation was already closed. Nothing new had happened since, so we let it go. We still laugh about it now, but it's a bit unsettling to think it really happened. Story 33. I'm a baby whisperer. It's a somewhat useless talent, considering I don't particularly care for kids, but I'm great with them. Years ago, I dated a girl whose sister had a child. I thought the kid was pretty well behaved. It wasn't until long after the relationship ended that I learned the child only behaved like that around me. I'm apparently his earliest memory, and even though I don't see him anymore, he still asks about me. Last I saw him, he was 3 to 4 or 5 years ago. At the time, I thought it was just a sweet connection. But during my last relationship, I noticed a pattern. That girlfriend had a baby, and the child only responded well to me. Slept, ate, played, obeyed, and trusted me more than anyone else. Hours of nightly screaming would stop after a few seconds of me making eye contact. She made major leaps in language, walking and listening skills just from being around me. By the time she was 18 months, her doctor was amazed. She was forming full sentences with me, counting, keeping rhythm, and doing everything I asked. It was well ahead of what they typically saw. I had become the primary father figure in her life. Since then, I've noticed the same pattern with other children. Kids who don't listen to babysitters or don't talk to anyone, will open up to me, share with me, and even ask about me later. As I said, it's not a talent I use much, but I feel like there must be some kind of purpose to it. It's rare to be able to truly connect with babies and small kids. I don't know what to make of it, but it's definitely real. Story 34. My entire family's involved in organized crime. The kind of serious stuff, people getting hurt, illegal business, and all the rest. I won't say where, but our influence spans across an entire corner of the US. When I was a kid, things always felt strange. I've always been a smart guy and picked up on things quickly. Even as a child, I noticed that things didn't add up. First off, my dad was killed 3 months after I was born. Someone he trusted shared that my dad was transporting money, about $250,000. A man he went to high school with, someone he considered a close friend, used that information to lure him somewhere and shot him in the back of the head, taking the money. That's how my life began. Growing up, I started realizing how unusual things were. We always had money, yet nobody worked. I had uncles who weren't really uncles. Most of them are gone now, either dead or moved across the country. I even witnessed one of them kill someone when I was about 8 years old. For years, my family denied anything was out of the ordinary, but I knew better. By the time I turned 16, I demanded answers. I was done being kept in the dark. They finally explained everything. We made money through various illegal enterprises. Loan sharking and drugs were big ones. I won't go into too much detail, but a lot of what you hear about this life is true. My 2 remaining uncles are both highly experienced. One of them is ex-military, trained in serious operations. The other grew up here and knew my father before he died. After they told me everything, I started helping with logistics. Nothing major at first, but I caught on fast. Now I manage most of our operations. The family legacy was handed from my great-grandparents to my grandparents, then to my father. Since he's gone, it's mine now. I'm 22 years old and running the show. The organization still functions like a well-oiled machine. I've never told anyone any of this before, but I figured I'd finally let it out somewhere anonymous, just to relieve the pressure. Feel free to ask questions before I shut this account down. Story 35. I was at a party having a pretty bad time after just splitting up with my girlfriend. The most attractive girl at my brother's school randomly approached me and asked what was wrong. I said nothing, but she didn't let it go. We talked. She offered me a smoke. I didn't even smoke at the time, but she was so attractive I probably would have done anything she asked, and we just talked the whole night. I swore to my friends I would make her my girl one day. Sadly, 3 years went by, and I never saw her again, until my first day of training at a new job. The girl I was talking to during orientation was super friendly and cute. She warned me not to get involved with a certain coworker who happened to share the same name as the girl I had vowed to date. I laughed it off, thinking it was just a coincidence. It's a somewhat common name. But as I was leaving orientation, who walks in? Her. We looked at each other, semi-awestruck. My GM introduced us and asked if we had met. I tried to break the tension with a joke and said, "Unfortunately." I was totally kidding, but the look of sadness on her face is something I'll never forget. I quickly apologized and told her I was just joking, and that was that. A few months later, we started dating. Things were great, but I learned she'd been through unimaginable trauma. She had been harmed by her own father and another family member. We dated for a while, but she eventually cheated on me. I broke up with her. Later, she cheated on her next boyfriend with me a couple of times, and I realized I needed to remove myself from the situation. I broke all ties and moved on. Then the girl I met during orientation, we'll call her Sarah, who had warned me about Elizabeth, started wanting to hang out. We became close, and she told me that she and Elizabeth used to be best friends. But Elizabeth was a compulsive liar. Eventually, Sarah and I started dating. We were together for nearly 5 months. She told me she loved me, way too soon, and even started talking about having kids. One night, I was supposed to take her to watch a meteor shower, but she bailed and didn't answer her phone. I went alone, and on my way home, I saw her walking with another guy I knew at 2 a.m. I didn't confront her then, but later I asked about it. She tried to guilt trip me. Eventually, when I told her I had seen her, she started crying and said she needed her privacy and that I was wrong to assume anything. We broke up. Later, a mutual friend told me that she and Elizabeth were basically the same person. Not literally, but in behavior. They used to be best friends until they started dating the same guys and fell out. I was just the last one in the chain. Elizabeth got arrested and fired for drug-related issues, and Sarah was about to be fired for rumored favoritism involving a new manager.